Grow Smart 101. So today we'll be focusing on responsible infrastructure. And so happy that you all are here and have joined us, and hopefully we'll have some others joining us as well. But we really appreciate you once again joining us today and taking the time to become more engaged citizens of Lexington. So my name is Brittany Rothmeyer. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, I'm the Executive Director of Fayette Alliance, and we are so proud to present Grow Smart 101 for the UK community on a wide range of topics, from growing our city in a smart, equitable way to agriculture and the significant impact that it has on our economy. This is the third of 4 sessions that we'll be hosting. So next Friday, March 12th at noon, will be our final discussion for the session on growing our city. And at that session, we'll hear from District 1 City Council Member James Brown and me as well on how we can best address the growth issues that our city is facing. So before we jump in, just want to mention a few housekeeping items. I know everyone is, for the most part, is accustomed to these Zoom sessions, but just in case, everyone is on mute, so please remain that way until we go into our breakout sessions. So we ask that any questions that you all have throughout the session, don't hesitate to ask them, but please put them in the chat and we'll do our best to get to all of those in our question and answer session after we hear from our panelists. So we'll start off with short presentations from each of our panelists, which we're so happy to have here with us today. And that will be followed by Q&A session with myself and the panelists. And then we'll go into Q&A session from you all, followed by, lastly, breakout sessions. So we encourage you all to join in the breakout sessions to break down a little bit of what you've learned today, what you took out of the session, and for us to learn more about what you all are interested in hearing about in the future. So everyone hopefully received an email that gave you the speaker bios and some great resources and term definitions. We will be sending a follow-up email to this session offering the recording of the session as well as another reminder about all of those resources. And I really encourage you all to look at those links that we included. We, gather all kinds of resources and information, but they're really, really helpful to understanding what we're going to be talking about here today, and then further educating yourselves on some of these topics. So I think it can provide a great foundation for this conversations that you will hopefully have moving forward. So a quick overview of Fayette Alliance and what we do here in Lexington. So we're a nonprofit land use advocacy organization, and we are completely funded by donations from engaged citizens like all of you. So we're dedicated to achieving smart, equitable, sustainable growth in Lexington, Fayette County in 3 main areas. So we focus on land use advocacy. So we as a nonprofit work hard at City Hall and beyond to advocate for policies and laws that sustainably and equitably grow our city and promote our farms. So we advocate for policies that promote community-driven investment and discourage displacement. The second way we achieve our work is through research. So as an organization, we're really fond of saying it's not if we grow, it's how we grow. So we focus on the how by working with experts to conduct research on complex issues facing our community's development. And the third way we do our work is through education. So Citizens Planning Academy, now called Grow Smart Academy, is our premier educational and signature educational offering, and is the basis for these Grow Smart 101 sessions that we've adapted for UK students. So this, our annual program is 4 sessions and offered every summer. So we really want citizens to get involved and really understand the issues that are impacting our community. We also have various in-person networking and educational events called Grow Smart Academy 2.0 that of course are now virtual. And we do those bi-monthly. So every other month we hear from local experts on a variety of smart growth topics throughout the year. So through these programs, our newsletter, and our various social channels, we really want our community to understand how land use decisions impact our community's health, economic development, environment, and quality of life, as well as how each of you all can advocate for smart and equitable land use policies in Lexington. So we absolutely encourage you all to sign up for our newsletter on our website, to stay tuned on these educational programming events, in addition to this course that you all are taking right now, and just stay tuned, follow along with us as we really continue to dig into these issues throughout the rest of the year. So for us, really focusing on equity, we know that historically and currently that inequitable and sometimes well-intentioned land use policies have had a negative impact on marginalized and underserved communities. So before I introduce our panelists, I do want to talk briefly about why Fayette Alliance as an organization focuses on land use, and specifically why today we feel like it's really important to talk about responsible infrastructure. So like I mentioned, we're very fond of saying our motto is, it's not if we grow, it's how we grow. So ensuring that our community grows in a sustainable way requires us to look at our infrastructure. And that encompasses a lot, but some of our main infrastructure needs that should be looked at as we continue to grow our community are sewers, roads, transportation, and parks. So all of these pieces of infrastructure work together to make our city a good place to live, and they require really intentional, thought out planning. So our city's urban services boundary was put into place in 1958 as an infrastructure boundary, as a way to focus resources for infrastructure like sewer lines and roads within our city and to limit urban sprawl that the city and our residents could not afford. So limiting urban sprawl and expensive city infrastructure is really critical to sustainable and equitable growth, especially for underserved low-income communities. In 2006, a little bit of a history lesson, our city was actually sued by the Environmental Protection Agency, or the EPA, for not keeping our stormwater and sewer systems up to date. So in 2012, the city entered into an agreement with the EPA to upgrade that sewer system, costing the city and thereby the taxpayers $590 million. And I'm sure that many of you all being on campus are familiar with all of the road work that's been going on around campus, and that's an update to our sewer system. So our city is spending, and our taxpayers are spending a lot of money updating that system so that we can continue to accommodate growth in our city. So this is really one example of how critical it is to upgrade infrastructure as we grow. And you all will see from our panelists today how infrastructure upgrades like adding faster public transit options and world-class trails and parks actually allow us to build our city in this equitable, really sustainable way for future generations. So these types of investments really benefit all of us, and they make Lexington the type of place that you all want to come to college or stay here and work after college, that some of us have come to as professionals, because the infrastructure of our city promotes a really, really high quality of life here. That's why we care about these policies as an organization, and why we want you all to learn about them and the really important role that they play here in Lexington. So it's my pleasure now to introduce our panelists, Kenzi Gleason and Brandi Peacher from the Lexington Fayette Urban County Government. So I'm going to let each of them introduce themselves, and hopefully you all saw their bios, which we provided in the original email that you should have received before this session, and let them take it away with their presentation. So Kenzi, if you'd like to start and introduce yourself, and then we can turn it over to Brandi.
All right. I'm Kenzi Gleason. I'm a transportation planner here with the City of Lexington, and I work very closely with our land use planners who develop our comprehensive plan for the city, as well as we do transportation planning for both Fayette County and Jessamine County. And of course, I'm here to speak about Nicholasville Road, which obviously connects directly into our county just to the south of us. And Brittany, do you want me to start my presentation, or is Brandi going to introduce herself first before
I'll let Brandi just do a brief introduction of herself, and then we'll turn it back to you, Kenzi.
All right, thanks, Brittany. Hi, everyone. My name is Brandi Peacher, and I am in the Office of the Mayor here in Lexington. My background is in architecture and urban design. I've had the pleasure to work with our city for over 10 years in a variety of capacities. First with our Downtown Development Authority, then in our Division of Planning, and then now in our Mayor's office. So I feel very lucky to have gotten to work with a lot of good folks in our city. But my work today is overseeing the Town Branch Commons project and the umbrella of projects that are underneath that, as well as several other public space investments that we are doing within our city's downtown core. I try to work with our Division of Planning, Parks and Rec, water quality, you name it, we cross those paths. So we coordinate a lot within our local government. So I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Brandi, and thank you, Kenzi. We're so excited for you all to be here and talk about these issues. So Kenzi, we'll let you take it from here.
me get going here. All right, are we seeing what we should be seeing? All right, let me. Okay, well, actually, I would say that Brittany touched on quite a few things that I was going to touch on in my introduction, so that was a great segue. I'm here to talk about Imagine Nicholasville Road today. I think I started one slide too soon, but no big deal. So the Imagine Nicholasville Road study was an outgrowth from our Imagine Lexington comprehensive plan for the city of Lexington, which of course, as Brittany mentioned, focuses or discusses the desire for our community to contain our growth within our urban service boundary. I hope my slides are not on a timer that just flipped without me hitting a button, but we'll see. And as part of that comprehensive plan, the recommendations to contain our growth within our urban areas, we said, okay, well, then where is that growth going to occur? How are we going to accommodate our housing needs in our community? And the recommendation was that we, shoot, I am on a timer, that we focus our growth or consider focusing our growth along our major corridors, in part because they're continuing to change over time. We know they're going to change, and how do we guide that growth? And there's a tremendous amount of underutilized land available on our corridors, mainly via parking lots. So is there an opportunity to provide some housing along those corridors, which has the additional benefit of putting people, they can live and get the various goods and services that they need all in one location without having to travel. So really, some of the main purposes of our study were to look at how do we address our city's housing needs? How can we meet our transportation needs that follows that housing and the people and where they live? And how can we ensure that we have a better mix of land uses along those corridors, where we don't just concentrate all commercial development and then all residential development away from those commercial properties. And in that vein, how can we make it so that it's much more walkable and bike friendly and provide good transit service to meet the transportation needs? And so what we looked at in the study was various, I don't know how to make that stop. I'll tell you what, would you all mind to do my slideshow instead? Because I can't get the timer off.
I can pull it up and do it.
I'm going to stop real quick. All right, and I can keep talking while you do that. I can't see your screen, so you'll have to let me know when it's up. And if you could go to the slide that says complete streets.
Can you all see my screen now?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Okay. All right. We are there, Kenzi.
Perfect. Thank you so much. All right, so the different strategies or the different components of the plan was that we need to complete our streets. We need to invest in a bus rapid transit style of transportation service along the corridor. And we need to make sure that the development that occurs along the corridor is conducive to encouraging people to walk more and to utilize that transit service. So again, the first component was complete streets, which, you know, for many years, we've been really good about, you know, building streets that are quite easy and comfortable to drive on. But the question is, what's missing from our streets and from our communities? So complete streets is sort of an approach that suggests that, you know, all streets should be multimodal in nature. They're not completely car centric. You need to be able to walk and bike along them. There should be nice transit stops, not necessarily, a sign on the side of the road near a ditch. I mean, why would anyone want to utilize public transit when you're not providing comfortable, safe, and convenient facilities for them to do so? And complete streets should be made for everyone, and that includes everybody of all ages and all abilities. The question should be for any roadway designer, once you've finished a infrastructure improvement project along a corridor, would you let your 8-year-old walk along or cross that street? And likewise, could your 80-year-old grandmother do the same? They need to be both comfortable, safe, and convenient for people of every age. Complete streets are green streets. They provide shade and green space because that provides a better environment for you as a pedestrian, and they're generally more aesthetically pleasing. So if you think about all of the great streets that you visited in different communities and different cities all over the world, there are probably complete streets. Those are the ones that come to mind, where there are places that you want to be, not just to travel through. And then the next slide here shows just an example of, even though this is a wide street very similar to Nicholasville Road, it's not one that's completely hostile to either cross or walk along by foot. Everyone has their designated space. Bicyclists have a safe trail away from traffic. Pedestrians have clearly marked crosswalks. The expansive roadway has been broken up into smaller crossings with medians and refuges for pedestrians. And, it's an aesthetically pleasing roadway. So this is the type of street that we would like to try to get to for our major corridors throughout Lexington. Next slide. We also asked ourselves, if we are going to intensify the uses along Nicholasville Road, how are we going to meet the travel demand that follows that? Certainly it doesn't make any sense to take an already very wide road at 8 lanes and make it 10 or 11 lanes. That's, it's just not sustainable. It's not going to solve our problem. There's a theory of what they call induced demand. Those people who right now, today, avoid Nicholasville Road because they expect it to be quite congested. If you add an extra lane for capacity, suddenly people will change their behaviors. They'll see the extra road width, they'll utilize the road. And then, the moment that you've opened that project up, it's been sucked back up, that capacity is gone. So I think the transportation planning profession has decided that widening roads is not going to solve our problem. We need to look at other ways of getting people to and from their destinations and to reduce the trip making they need to do to get their daily needs met. So we think about the capacity of the road, not just about moving cars, but instead, how do we move more people? And buses are an efficient way to do that and to add more capacity to your system. So what we've proposed for Nicholasville Road is a bus rapid transit system, which is, if you've ever ridden a subway or light rail in another community where you have stops along the way, bus rapid transit is similar to that in that there are substantial, comfortable, convenient stations up and down a corridor where you catch a bus just as opposed to a train. And the benefit being that they're much more low cost to implement and operate over time. But they have high frequency service where, a bus will come by every 10 or 15 minutes. You don't really have to rely on a schedule. You can go to a stop and a bus will come by sometime in the very near future. They travel at a faster speed because they don't stop as often. The stations are located every half mile or so, and it's a very reliable and accessible service, one that's very comfortable. There's Wi-Fi in the buses, and it's a different type of experience. And next slide. So another component of the Nicholasville plan is suggesting that the style and the design of the developments needs to be more responsive to humans and less oriented towards vehicles. So we're looking at much more walkable environments, a higher density so that you have, more residential density, think, 3-4 story apartment buildings, but we have a mix of uses across the area and within those buildings, and that those are oriented around those high quality transit stops where we have the high frequency service coming in and out. So they really create more of a live, work, entertainment hub. So something that you might relate to as a student is, we have the high density dorms located on the corner of Avenue of Champions, and there are nearby restaurants, and there's a Target nearby. And all of those developments are much more oriented towards you arriving by foot as opposed to driving a car. So we're trying to replicate somewhat of a similar experience to that, not just in our urban core, but along our major corridors as well. In the next slide. So we selected a few sites along the corridor to demonstrate how they could change and evolve over time. And Fayette Mall is one example that we've provided here. You can see the vast expanses of parking, much of which is not being utilized. I guess they have enough parking to accommodate their 100-year sale, sort of like the 100-year flood, but for the most part, it's not being utilized on a consistent day-to-day basis. So if you go to the next slide, there were 3 sites selected as part of our planning process. This is just an example of one, but you can see how, we're looking to intensify the uses. All of that orange there represents residential uses, 3 and 4 stories. And perhaps with a mix of uses underneath, restaurants, banks, the different things that you need from day to day. But we've brought those up to the street so that they interface more with the actual roadway and provide some clear paths of travel from the street to the entrances of the mall, where you would have plazas and sidewalks and green space and so forth to make it an attractive place to be, someplace that you might want to live. And you would meet with people outside, have a cup of coffee with a friend, and carry on with your day-to-day activities. So, and I think that you can see these as you travel to other more urban areas where they are also trying to accommodate a great deal of growth, that the major corridors have a more walkable and pedestrian-oriented feel than our major corridors do today. And then the next slide, if you would, the plan looks at, okay, well, if we add all of this density to our corridors, how can we expect to meet the need for travel? And Brittany asked me to focus on, the UK area in particular. This is just, if you visit our site, you can see in our plan that we looked at the corridor in 6 different segments and talked about the different improvements that we would need along those. Obviously, bike and pedestrian improvements, as well as the transit. Where would the stops be? What would the design character of those stops look like, and so forth. Here in the UK area, the main stations for the BRT would be located downtown and at the Target. And then a little further downstream in the next slide, you can see there would also be one centered at the medical center. And one of the treatments that we have recommended for improving the efficiency of transit service through the campus area is looking at a center running bidirectional bus lane. If you could flip to the next slide. This was just implemented in Indy recently when they launched their red line, which is a BRT line. We don't have, it wouldn't be possible to designate the rightmost lane through the campus area as just a bus only lane, so that the bus could, move through the corridor much more quickly than vehicular traffic, which is a major incentive for people to utilize the service. What they're looking at doing is running the bus in the center of the street, and providing a stop at the center. You can kind of see in the drawing the concept in the lower right of what those stations and stops would look like. And actually the pictures to the top are of the line in Indianapolis as well. So we recognize that campus is, of course, one of our major draws of employment and travel patterns. So we want to make sure that we provide a very high quality of service in the campus area. So I tried to hit on just some of the key components of Imagine Nicholasville Road. We have a number of videos online that explain the concepts that are in the plan, and you can certainly view those there if you want, a lot more in-depth detail about the proposals. That website is imaginenicholasvilleroad.com.
Thank you so much, Kenzi. I've seen a couple of different presentations about this project, and I just think it's so exciting. And I hope that the rest of y'all on this call feel the same way. I mean, it just has the potential to really make such a big impact in our city and this community, and how we utilize Nicholasville Road, which we all do. And so I just think it's really exciting, and I'm excited to dig in a little bit more after we hear from Brandi. So I'll turn it over, Brandi, to you and see your presentation, and then we'll have a little more in-depth discussion.
Okay, thank you. Want to confirm that my screen is up? All right, good deal. Okay, so you've already heard a lot of good stuff from both Brittany and Kenzi, and so I'll try not to repeat anything, but let me just kind of back up and zoom out for a second and just redefine what is infrastructure. Brittany already told us a lot of that, which is we see it as our roads, we know it's our lighting on those roadways, could be something underground, our sewers, as she spoke of, which we're upgrading for that EPA Consent Decree. It's also our services. It's our garbage and waste collection. It's snow removal, even that pesky ice that we had a couple of weeks ago. That's part of our infrastructural system as a city. And it's the buses and this bus rapid transit that Kenzi just spoke of, which is such a fabulous concept, and I hope to see in Lexington. But it's also our public safety. All of this is infrastructure to a city. But infrastructure is also the spaces that we might enjoy more recreationally, which be our trails and our bike paths, as well as our streets. This is part of our infrastructure. It is where we live, where we have our engagement with each other. It is our social and civic infrastructure. It's not only the structure within the park and the park itself, but it's the activities that it allows for us to have as a community. And so that is what I really want to speak about today is, yes, infrastructure are all those things that we just spoke of, but in turn, the reason we build all this infrastructure is for the quality of life. It is for why we live in Lexington. And we want to hear from you as students. What is it that you want to have in Lexington so that it encourages you to come here for school, to stay here as a young professional, or if you move away, maybe you'll come back someday. So this civic infrastructure is what I really want to come to talk about. And so how is Lexington doing things differently? And in recent years, and probably years before my time, but I can specifically speak to the past 10 years, our city has identified key projects that would work in concurrence, so build them at the same time. That would allow various types of infrastructure to be implemented together while we leverage multiple funding sources. And so in that sense, we are building responsible infrastructure, and we're working together across different sectors in order to do so. And so an example of that, I have to say, is the project I'm working out of in the mayor's office, Town Branch Commons. This is a transformative public-private park and trail system through the heart of our downtown. And so if you're not familiar, I'll review that and then we can discuss here in a little bit as a group, but it will trace through the heart of downtown. And if you're not familiar, Lexington was settled upon the banks of the Town Branch Creek. Now, if you go downtown today, you do not see a creek. The creek is nowhere to be seen unless you go searching for it at either east or west end, and it's overgrown. Where it is it's in a large pipe under our feet along Midland Avenue and Vine Street. And so our trail will not unearth that water system, but instead the trail will follow its path and trace its historic path so that we can move and ride and walk about that path and learn more about our city's history through this system we're building. So it's not just a trail project we're building. We see this as a linear park system connecting not only a series of parks that already exist, but the potential for future public spaces and parks that might be found along the spine of this system. And it's also a way for us to incorporate a variety of other types of infrastructure that we were speaking of. As part of this project, there was the first phase was a utility phase, which included that consent decree upgrade of our sanitary sewer system along Midland Avenue. So we're taking those to opportunities as we tear up the street, as we work together to upgrade systems and incorporate a variety of infrastructural components, but then finishing this off with a final product that is more of a system that I hope you and I will use on a day-to-day basis, not only to move throughout the city, but for recreational purposes and social purposes as well. So if we zoom out, here is Fayette County and the urban services area that Brittany said at the beginning is indicated here between the change in green and gray. And what you have is the Legacy Trail. If you're not familiar, you can get on at the horse park and make your way toward downtown. That was recently completed all the way into the heart of downtown along the East End neighborhood and ends at Isaac Murphy Memorial Art Garden at 3rd and Midland. We also have Town Branch Trail that starts in the west side, Masterson Station, and begins to make its way through closer to downtown. What was missing was that hub to connect you to these two systems. And as Kenzi can probably speak to, there are plans for a trail system connecting east, south, every which direction through our county. And so Town Branch Commons was that missing link in order for you to connect in every direction. And so this trail system that we're building will do just that. And once completed at the end of 2022, you will right off the bat be able to be connected to 22 continuous miles of trail systems, not including all that our departments are working on to connect to in addition to this. The project, if we look in downtown, it spreads through the entire length. So Midland Avenue and Vine Street is the heart of the Town Branch Commons Trail. We also have the Town Branch Park. The Town Branch Park is a 10-acre park that is proposed behind Rupp Arena. And that project is not funded by the city, but we have private partners who have taken on that project. They're fundraising for it, and they will design, build, and operate that in the future. And in turn, the city is investing in the trail systems and other city parks in downtown. So this shows you that linkage of Legacy Trail, the Town Branch Connector, which we recently finished on Newtown Pike, Town Branch Trail going through the Distillery District, and how the Commons will connect those. So here's just a glimpse of what the future of the backside of Rupp Arena may look like with the Town Branch Park. They are currently in their design phase and have raised a considerable amount of money toward their goal to build this project. So they should be building in the next few years, and hopefully that will be open soon after. The Town Branch Trail going through the downtown piece is what the city is working on today. This project is significantly funded by a variety of grant funds that were received. Namely, the Tiger Grant was our largest one, and that is a federal transportation grant. We received $14 million, along with several other grant sources, which have all equaled up to approximately $40 million, along with our local bonded funds to support this project. So let me quickly go over what this might look like in the future. You have a multi-use trail on Midland Avenue and a separated facility on Vine Street. What we've tried to do is our normal design processes in the past have looked at the cars as the most important, stormwater, of course, being incorporated in public transport. But now we're looking at all things as equal and as we do our designs, looking at air quality, our bike lanes, our ecological components of the project. And so we're taking things like this on Midland Avenue, where I'll be honest, it's not somewhere I want to walk or bike, and we're turning it into a more welcoming space and a space that will provide space for all types of movement. throughout the corridor, whether you walk, bike, or are on a bus or in a car. We are still accommodating the same number of vehicles. We've simply reduced the width of the travel lanes, shifted them over, and reallocated that space to one side of the street so that we can provide this vast trail system on one side. So this is a section to help you see what are the components along Midland Avenue. Again, the roadway here on the left and the trail here in the middle. What's different is that we have gone beyond that. We're really, truly making this a linear park. Between the car and the bicycles, we're incorporating what are called bioswales. Bioswales are environmental, ecological feature along the corridor that will collect rainwater, stormwater runoff from the trail, from the adjacent properties, and from the roadway. That water then works its way into this naturalized system. The water percolates through, it cleanses that water naturally and puts it back into our storm system in a more responsible manner than having to treat it as much further down the road. We also, as you can see, have a variety of other things that we're layering on top of this, not only transportation, not only water quality, but we're talking about that engagement to our community through this system. We're also talking about providing opportunities for public health and access to these facilities to support public health. And we're trying to incorporate learning opportunities along the length of this project with signage and various other engaging features. Another thing that I think is exciting is bringing the heart of the bluegrass into downtown. We are trying to take these features of water, of our native grasses and plantings and our trees, and bring those into downtown. You look at Midland Avenue today, I don't really see that. And so we're excited to say our new system will incorporate those features along the trail. So you will see over 3 times as many trees along our downtown corridor as you do today. We will be installing so many more new trees. We will have some recirculating water features. That way you get the sense and presence of water that mimics the natural landscape. But you'll also see a lot of dry planted areas such as this with grasses that are beautiful to experience, but also provide a natural buffer between you as a pedestrian and cyclist and the vehicles that are moving next door to you. So there are a variety of community benefits, and we can speak more to that as we have our discussion, but they go beyond just that of moving throughout our city. It really hits upon our safety, our environment, our economic benefits that we all see that are a result of investments such as this. So I'll leave it at that, and we can talk a little bit more. Thank you.
Sure, that's wonderful. So again, I mean, I just want to say both from Kenzi and Brandi, from your presentation, I learned something new every time I hear from you all, and I hope that everyone else on the call is as excited about this stuff as I am. I mean, it really is just incredibly enormous for Lexington, and will just make a really big impact on the way we experience this community. So I hope all our rising talent here on the call remembers this and wants to stay when they graduate. So wanted to dive into some questions and explore, your all's work on these projects a little bit more. I think that thinking and asking questions about equity and accessibility in our community when we're making discussions on infrastructure investments is really critical. I think that those issues have even, absolutely come more to the forefront as, in 2020, we're really reckoning with these systemic, historic racial injustices and all of the inequities that the pandemic brought out. There's this question of who is burdened by these investments being made and who's benefiting by these investments being made. And so can each of you all speak a little bit to how your work on these projects takes the issues of equity and accessibility into consideration? I'm just trying to think about how we can all, as citizens, as students, as professionals, play a role in these kind of considerations going forward. And either one of you all.
Sure, I can take a first pass at this. I mean, one of the things that we strive for in the planning profession is that no individual should need to expend more than 30% of their income on housing and transportation. That, as people who spend more than that tend to struggle to meet their other needs. So I think Imagine Nicholasville Road is trying to get at two components of that. One, more housing, such that, the more housing we can provide, the more affordable it will be in our community. Anytime you have a lack of housing, the prices go up and you force people out of the community because they can no longer afford the rent or to purchase a property. And then secondly, car ownership is one of the most burdensome things that some folks can encounter as well. It costs, they say on average, $7,000 a year to provide a car payment, your insurance, your maintenance, gas, and so forth. So for those who, would like to or cannot afford a vehicle, we're trying to offer other options and other ways for them to meet their daily needs by living close to where they work. I mean, there are a lot of people who work at Fayette Mall, and wouldn't it be convenient if they could live just next door and then they have a bus system that can provide them, connections to the rest of the community via that transit system, and so forth. So having options and not being burdened with the cost of car ownership, I think is an equity issue.
Yeah, that's a great point, Kenzi. I'll add to that just from a more of a public space and civic infrastructure side. When we're talking about our parks, our trails, our community centers, our libraries, our groups are trying in every way that they can as they plan for and look ahead for years to come as to where we need to invest, and that we do that all across our county, not just in one location, that it's done equitably. Because we need, just as Kenzi said, we want people to be able to walk to things. We want them to be closer to their jobs. We also want them to be closer to these civic assets such as parks, so that they can get out and enjoy life outside of just working and being inside their home. It provides that extra layer to our quality of life. And so there is a desire to have a park or a public space that's within a 10-minute walk from everyone's home. And I know our Parks and Recs department is working hard to make sure that is something that we can hopefully provide. And at the very least, all of our systems that we already do have in place, our parks in place, that those are kept at a level and programming is provided that helps lift up the community that's nearby. I mean, not to mention, if we look at the past year, when many things shut down, what remained open? It was those civic infrastructure pieces. And those community centers, those parks, they became the hub for dispensing information to neighborhoods. We took it to people rather than having to come to us. So vaccines are now on with mobile workshops going from community center to community center and providing access to those needs to our community in a way that we wouldn't be able to do if those assets didn't exist.
Those are great points. And I think, those considerations are so important to talk about as we're really promoting this type of infrastructure and, talking about why we as community members should care about it. Can you all speak to, and I think you all touched on this, but, another part I think of equity in this type of investment is whose voices are at the table when these decisions are getting made. Who's being engaged to offer their input as a citizen. And I know, that's really difficult in communities for so many different reasons. Can you all speak to, in these particular projects, how community engagement was approached and what that looked like? How were people expressing, as just community members, how are they incorporated into the process?
Well, I can speak to Imagine Nicholasville Road first. We had a tremendous amount of community interest in the corridor plan. Sometimes when we go through planning processes, things that you think might bring a lot of people out to provide their opinions don't, and then vice versa. So we did several formats of public input. We had a public meeting just before the pandemic hit, it was, I think, a week or two before things were shut down. And we had about 125 people attend, which is pretty substantial for an in-person public meeting by our standards. We also did an online survey, which, I think helps to get the word out into the community more, and that it doesn't take the time commitment to go to a meeting. It's an easier format to solicit public input, and sort of something that requires a low bar of time and energy on behalf of the person who's providing that input. But on the other hand, it does exclude those who aren't as internet savvy or don't have access to the internet and so forth. So we do try to make sure that you use various sources, not just rely on any one particular type of public input form. But we did have about 5,000 people respond to our survey, and we asked them, do you work on the corridor? Do you live along the corridor? Do you just travel there for shopping and other things? And we tried to make sure that we heard from a balance of people, not just the people who live across town that want to, get to the mall, as easily and quickly as possible, and by car. We really wanted to hear about the people who do work along the corridor, and what would encourage them to perhaps consider living along the corridor and to utilize the transit surface. And for the people that do live along the corridor, they had very different concerns. A lot of the general public was very concerned with traffic and how it flows. They were thinking about just themselves as the user. But for those who actually live along the corridor, they were the ones that talked about, I'd like it to be more bicycle and pedestrian friendly, and more trees and plantings, so that they, in their day-to-day experience of it, got more enjoyment out of the corridor. They were more invested, so to speak, in what the actual look and feel of the corridor is, and how the transit service would benefit them. Where would the stops be? How far would I have to walk? Those types of questions.
That's really impressive, Kenzi. I mean, you had a lot of input through that project. So that it's very important. And I hope that those who are on this call, the fact you're here shows you're interested. And so we encourage you to continue to engage. And when you hear of opportunities for your input to be heard on plans such as this, that you plug in. For the Town Ranch Commons, this project has been in the making since 2011. And so there's been a variety of ways that we've engaged the community, whether it be from the typical all-call public meeting, come in person and huddle around a map and give us your ideas, to we hosted a series of walk-bike events over the course of one summer so that people could come out, and we shut down a lane of traffic along Midland and Vine that kind of indicated where the trail would be someday. And we offered activities at the parks along its route. And at the same time, people were out having fun. We were educating them about the project and talking to them, getting their input. Nothing really seems to be better than just sitting down and talking with somebody to gain their input. But of course, in our current situation, that's harder and harder to do. But I also say, despite the pandemic, we're all busy. It's hard for us to commit that time. So any way that we can get feedback through social media and online, we've attempted that as well. And I would just throw out to this group afterwards, please send us some ideas of other creative ways for us to get our projects out in front of you. We're open to ideas. So yeah, Town Ranch Commons has had a variety of engagement opportunities, but some of the more traditional are working with our council members. If you live here locally, you live in a district, and that district is represented by a council member, so they can help connect you to information and give you information, and they help us be a conduit to our neighbors and our constituents within the city. And then there's just a lot of different ways we try online and through local television to provide more information as well.
I think, all of those, and for everyone to really understand, what goes into these projects when you see these, enormous investments that the city's making. I think it's really important to think, it wasn't just kind of the city machine that made this come to life. It was real people that live in this community and experience this community saying, this is what's meaningful to us. This is the way we want to experience Lexington. So I appreciate you all, shedding a little bit of light on what that looks like. And I think, you spoke to how students can stay involved. I mean, these projects, you know, they've got websites. You can access the website and learn more about these projects and submit your comments and thoughts. And so I think those are really important as well. But we've got one question in the chat, and I want to ask you all that, make sure we get to it. But I'd encourage the rest of you on the call, if you all have questions for our expert panelists here, please put them in the chat. I would love to make sure that the things that you all are curious about are getting addressed here. And so Rhiannon has a question, and she says, I'm originally from Illinois and I live very close to St. Louis. Coming to Kentucky, I've noticed that most streets don't have reflectors or reflective paint. Is there a reason behind this? And that's a really interesting question.
Kenzi, do you have any insights?
Well, I got repeated. I got slightly distracted.
No problem. All right, so
My brain wandered for a moment.
Gotcha. One of our questioners is from Illinois, and lives very close to St. Louis. So coming to Kentucky, they noticed that most streets don't have reflectors or reflective paint. And is there a reason for this in our kind of road infrastructure that you're aware of?
Yeah, that's sort of a traffic engineering question as opposed to a planning question. I don't know if she means like the reflective, they're in the pavement, actually when they lay the asphalt down, they put little reflective pieces down on the asphalt. I know that that's common in rural areas. I don't know if it's as common in urban areas. I don't know if part of that is because it's sort of a distraction to the eye when you have so much other activity going on around you. As a driver in an urban area, there's a lot to focus on and concentrate on. And I do believe that the paint has reflective beads in it of some sort, and those are just standards that are followed. There's something called the Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices, which Brandi probably had to work with in designing the Town Branch Commons project, but that defines, what the different materials and markings must follow certain standards. And I'm guessing that we're following that manual rather closely, although some urban areas may have different approaches and preferences in terms of, the flexibility that is provided within those standards.
Gotcha.
I will add, I asked a similar question to one of my traffic engineers on the project one day, because when it's raining, I don't feel like I can see the painted lane markers. Mm-hmm. And I feel like 10 years ago I could. And no one knew the real answer, but someone thought that the standard had changed because of an environmental concern of the oils and things in that paint and the beads and the way that it's installed, that environmental decision may have been changed, but in the end, it may have led to a less reflective paint, or the beads don't hold on as long. So that could be, that's all conjecture. I don't know if that's true or not.
That does sort of ring a bell though. I feel like I do remember hearing that, and that they were complaining that the paint that they have to use now washes off too quickly, and it every single year they have to go out and repaint the lines, whereas before they could make it several years in between, and it's quite a maintenance burden.
If I may, it was my question. So I meant by saying that I live near St. Louis, I'm like in the metropolitan sprawl of St. Louis, but on the Illinois side. So I've experienced both Illinois roads and Missouri roads, and coming to Kentucky, I am so much more anxious driving around, especially at night or in the rain, because I cannot see the lanes on the roads. I cannot see the lanes going either direction. I cannot see the lanes when they're like, because especially down one side of campus, there's 6 lanes, but those lanes each change during what time of day what direction they go. So I didn't know if anybody had an answer for that, but I appreciate it.
Well, and Nicholasville Road, I think is what you're referring to. Part of the confusion, and I remember the first time I drove on Nicholasville Road as a student, I was like, what in the world is this? I mean, there's no lane markings, they're just all dashes. What does that mean? And I guess the answer is you have to look up at the X's and the O's to tell you which lane you're supposed to be in, and it changed from time of day. We are recommending we remove the reversible lanes as part of the Imagine Nicholasville Road study, so hopefully that will eliminate some of that driver confusion.
Yeah, that's a great question for that exact reason, because I think, a lot of especially the changing lanes on Nicholasville is such a huge issue. So I think that's good to know that that is being recommended to be changed and updated, and hopefully will result in safer driving conditions for us all.
Well, the reversible lanes were meant to move traffic as quickly as possible through the area, and we have other goals that we're trying to achieve. So while they might have been really great at moving cars, we have some other quality of life things that we're trying to improve, like planted medians and so forth that you can't have with the reversible lane system.
Absolutely. Yeah. And, as those priorities change and we reevaluate what makes the best kind of experience, that's good. We've got the changes are on the way. When we're thinking about the future of investment in infrastructure in the Lexington community, what do you all see as the future? Where's the greatest need for investment? In addition to the projects that we heard from you all today?
Well, I'm of the opinion that we spent many decades building capacity for vehicles in our communities, and that we have a lot of ground to make up in terms of providing a more holistic transportation system for all. So you'll see, for instance, in our long-range plan for transportation investments in our community, there are a handful of roadways that we've identified for major improvements that are, a bit more vehicular capacity oriented, like New Circle Road, for instance. But on the whole, for the most part, the remaining projects are really geared towards modernization and complete streets. And, I think that is the focus of a lot of urban areas right now. We've sort of recognized the mistakes that we made, and now we've got a lot of work to do to retrofit that. You'll see in the core of our city, you had more walkable streets and there were sidewalks and so forth. But then as you move out over time towards the urban edge, there was a period of time in the 70s and 60s where sidewalks weren't being built. So you see gaps in the sidewalk network. And those are the areas where, as I mentioned, you see the transit signs and the ditches and so forth. So I think one of our greatest needs is completing our network for everyone, and that we need to spend our time and money in investing in that over the next couple of decades to get us back where we need to be. And we need to make sure that when we build new infrastructure, it's done well and it's done right, so that we don't find ourselves retrofitting it later.
I'll second that, Kenzi. I think that's definitely a very important path forward for us, and all these projects that Kenzi and I are speaking of deal a lot with that transportation network, connecting our neighborhoods, connecting people to their jobs. So I'd say that on top of that is, once we have identified our investment needs for those corridors and these public spaces, it's then looking at the immediately adjacent and neighborhoods and spaces, and what can we do to help support smart infill and redevelopment, encourage new growth in jobs and workforce development, and bringing more activity to these neighborhoods. How can we get more services and daily needs fulfilled within your own neighborhood, rather than you having to drive across town to get to something? So while we need this network across our city, it's also important for us to invest in each neighborhood or each district, so that you have what you need closer by than having to go across town. Yeah,
absolutely. And here's another really good question, and I think is certainly a concern in the community. Are there concerns that the Town Branch Commons project could increase the cost of living in the neighborhoods that it goes through? And so if so, how does the city plan to ensure that the project does not displace people who are already living in those areas?
that's a great question, and yes, that's always on our mind whenever we invest in public infrastructure like this. We see across the country, when you invest in these civic assets, it is a catalyst for more development, which is great. That's great for our community. But how do we protect those who have been there, who live there, and who want to remain there? And I can't speak to that, the exact efforts, but I know our division of planning constantly looks at policy changes and that sort of thing. But in particular, we have a council member and a task force that is dedicated to assessing this, called Neighborhoods in Transition. And their purpose is to identify and protect, where these vulnerable residents are, what the consequences would be of redevelopment such as this, and what are ways for us in preserving their needs and what resources they need to remain in place if that is their desire. So there's different ways that they're assessing that now, and will continue to. They've already looked at a lot of this, but it's an ongoing effort. This is not something you just solve overnight. It's not one policy will solve it. And so the mayor, the council, it's all top of mind. And I think that we'll continue to dive a little deeper as the projects continue to change our landscape across the city.
Absolutely. And next week, we'll be speaking with Councilmember James Brown, who is chairing that Neighborhoods in Transition Task Force that Brandi mentioned, because that is, it's got to be something that we constantly keep top of mind as we're making these investments in the city. And as you said, it is that very difficult balance of wanting to, of course, make investments in a community, because that does increase our quality of life. However, working to put policies in place to ensure that those investments don't cause the displacement that we don't want to see. And so as we continue to, our cities continue to grow and change, and we make the city better, we have to put those policies in place, and we have to be proactive about them. The Lexington Community Land Trust did a really great presentation last night. They hosted a screening of the video Segregated by Design, which is based on Richard Rothstein's book called The Color of Law, that talks about the history of planning and zoning policy and segregating our communities, and then the resulting gentrification that occurs when we make investments. And it was a really interesting conversation. That was something that we included for everyone on the call in your last email. So if you're curious about that conversation, would certainly encourage you all to check out the Lexington Community Land Trust Facebook page. And that has a recording of that conversation. And I think we'll dig into that a little bit more next week as well, because, as a community who is focusing on infill and redevelopment, along with every other community in this country, to be honest, that strategy is not unique to Lexington. As a country, we're saying we have invested over the past decades in car-dependent development and sprawl, and we are reining that in and beginning to realize that that's not an efficient use of our land. And so as we do redevelop this kind of car-centric development that we've done for so long, how do we ensure that those investments, like we said, aren't displacing people? And that takes proactive policy. It takes putting policies in place to ensure that we can make those investments, but also that vulnerable populations are protected. And so it's a very fine line. And we have to continue moving forward, but also be willing as a community to put the policies in place to protect vulnerable communities that we need to put in place. So looking forward to that conversation as well. And then one last question before we go into our breakout rooms. And that is, Kenzi, this is specific, about the Nicholasville Road project. I know you talked about this a little bit in your presentation, and Rihanna's question about traffic management. So, as it relates particularly to congestion, what do you think that the biggest changes are being proposed as it relates to traffic congestion on Nicholasville Road? What would you say the top the top plan in place is to reduce congestion?
Okay. So, and I didn't talk that much about the vehicular improvements that are proposed in the plan, but I think three key things. One is access management. So that's reducing the number of access points along the roadway, combining driveways. If you travel the corridor, you'll see that there's, you can turn into all of the developments, and many times there's several access points that are serving the same development. So one goal is to reduce those access points. Another is they have looked at a number of different types of innovative intersection designs that are becoming more and more popular across the country that restrict turning movements. So when you can restrict or reduce the number of phases that a traffic signal needs to go through, particularly for left turning movements. You significantly increase sort of the throughput along the corridor. So actually our transportation cabinet has a plan to do those type of intersection treatments all through Jessamine County leading to Lexington, and we would want to target some of the key bottleneck locations along the corridor for those types of improvements. And there are benefits not just to the vehicles, but to the buses. They're stuck in traffic just like the cars are, right? So, and then the third strategy is to try to get more people not utilizing their cars and utilizing the bus. And by doing things like giving signal priority to buses along corridors, there's a way that you can time your signal system such that if a bus is approaching a signal, it'll hold it green so the bus can progress through the intersection. There's ways that you can help to improve bus service. And the hope is that if the bus is at least as convenient, if not more convenient to driving, people will choose that, instead. If you're sitting in a car and the bus passes you by, you might be more likely to think about, hey, perhaps. And, that's also coupled with policies, for instance, with UK, that's a major destination. And it's as much as nobody likes it, it's very positive that they charge so much for you to park on campus because it disincentivizes people to park on campus. And if you may be able to get, door to door, on the bus, you may be able to get to your destination much more quickly and efficiently than, paying for the parking, taking a shuttle from the outlot, towards wherever your destination is on campus. It's multi-layered, I guess is the point. There is no one particular solution. It's just layers upon layers of strategies and interventions to try and address the overall problem.
But I think, that our cities being so intentional about addressing these issues is really exciting. And I hope that you'll continue to follow along with what comes of both of these projects, which are just really, really exciting for Lexington. And so just want to say another special thank you to our speakers for an excellent discussion on these important issues.
Pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks.